A form is a structured document or interface used to collect, organize, and process information systematically. We see forms everywhere in our day-to-day life. There are the traditional paper forms used for applications, surveys, or records. Some of these have been converted to web-based forms, which we may be more familiar with. Then there are digital forms, which are online or software-based interfaces for collecting and processing data. There can be Excel-based applications that are designed for such purposes. In this video, we will explore how to onboard such applications to Boardwalk Velocity platform to enter and subsequently retrieve the entered data. Here is an example of a form application where we are looking at capturing the information for a loan application. The logged-in user is the person who is using this form to capture the information on the borrower and the lender from whom the loan is being requested. The user will be entering data in the peach-colored cells. The green-colored cells are read-only and have formulas that get calculated once the information is entered in the peach-colored cells. Once the data has been entered and reviewed, the user will submit the data to the server, which then will be available to the other people, like the maker and checker, who can then report on the data. Form-based applications generally are used when once the data has been entered and verified by the individual entering the data, the formulas that were used to derive the data are no longer needed. In other words, once the data is entered, it may not be changed in the future. That means only the data is stored in the database and not the formulas. This also implies that when we retrieve this data, only the data part will be retrieved and no formulas will be present. So, once the data has been submitted, the calculated cells may not be changed in the future. We may have a function where the head office sets rates for different branches. For simplicity, let's assume the mortgage calculation application only requires these head office rates, which will be accessed by the mortgage calculator. Let's now delve into how this application will be onboarded to Velocity. We should clear all the data from the workbook before onboarding. The form typically is hidden in the workbook, hence we will hide it. The rate tab will also be hidden, so we should hide it. The only visible sheet is our instruction sheet now. Let's close the workbook and save it, just in case we made any changes. Now we will open the Velocity Accelerator workbook and validate the EUC. Validation of the Form EUC is done the same way, but with some minor changes. We click on the Validate EUC, then we select the folder where our workbooks are stored. Accelerator then starts gleaning information from our workbooks. In this case, we are naming the role to be representative. We will keep the access type as editable. For the head office file to edit rates, we will use the role HO and also keep the access type as editable. Now looking at the workbook/worksheet definitions, we need to change the worksheet classification from a cuboid to a form for the loan calculator. However, for the yearly rate, we will keep the classification to cuboid. And for the instruction sheet, we will make it static in nature. For the head office workbook, the rates sheet will still be a cuboid. Now the rates sheet in the mortgage calculator workbook needs to be changed to read-only, as we don't want the representatives to change the rates being provided. Now the loan calculator sheet is hidden, so how will the system work? Well, this is where configuring the Form EUC is different. We will need a home page to trigger new requests or retrieve an older request. We can create this home page by going to the Boardwalk Velocity menu, navigate to the EUC section, click on Form EUC menu, and click on Model Create Request option. This creates a default cuboid structure with 4 columns: Request, Request ID, Form Cuboid ID, Display Active. These columns are system used and one should not modify either of these. Neither should the column structure be changed. Let's examine the purpose of each of these columns. The request column is for the system to store comments in. The request ID column is used to store a unique ID for all the requests we will be working with in the system. For example, if we were creating a loan for a user Mark, then that request will be referenced by a unique request ID. And then if we create another for John, that will have a separate request ID. All request IDs will be stored in the Request ID column. The request IDs are automatically generated by the system and hence require the column name to exactly what it is defaulted to. The Form Cuboid ID column stores the ID of the cuboid to which the form belongs to. When we export the EUC, each of the cuboids listed in the workbook/worksheet definitions is given a system-generated ID. In the case of a Form EUC, Velocity uses a form staging cuboid to store the data for the form. If there are multiple forms, then the data for all the forms will be stored in this single form staging table. This form staging cuboids will have a unique system-generated ID, which will be stored in the Form Cuboid ID column. Thus, when we submit the data in the form, it stores all the data in the form staging table. Point to remember is that the form staging table supports only storage of data and not the formulae. Thus, when we retrieve the data from the form staging table, there are only values retrieved with no formulas. Display active column stores the information on which request is active at the current time. This is again managed by the Velocity system at runtime, hence the name should not be changed. The column holds values of either yes or no. Hence, if a particular request is active, it will be marked as yes. All others will be marked as no. Let's add 2 additional columns, borrower's name and lender's name, that we can use for the application's purpose. As the column name suggests, we will add the borrower's name and the lender's name in the respective columns against each request. Subsequently, when we go to retrieve in the requests, we are able to identify the requests by these fields. Let's add some formatting, like shade the user-defined column headers differently, changing the color of the text and the background. Make them bold for consistency with other column headers. Let's ensure that the request ID column is editable. Check if the request ID, Form Cuboid ID, and Display Active columns are protected. Ensure that we can enter values in the columns we created, i.e., they are unlocked. We can add some borders to the cells. Now that we have completed this definition, let's work on the configuration changes. From the Form EUC menu, let's select Configure EUC Form Sheet. This will add another sheet called Configuration. Let's understand the columns present in this workbook and their functions. The Action column has values for all the functions that one can perform on the form or forms that we are going to have in this EUC workbook. While onboarding the EUC, you may recall we have hidden the form sheet. So, when we create a new request, we need to show the form. To do this, we start by adding the form name under the Worksheets column against the Create Row of Actions column. If we have multiple forms, then we separate the forms in the same cell delimited by the pipe symbol. Next, during the creation of the request, we would like the form to be presented. To do that, we enter True under the Visible column for the Create Row. This tells Velocity to unhide the form when a request is being created. Similarly, we want the same action to be performed when a request is being retrieved, so let's copy the values that we entered against Create and paste them for Retrieve too. Additionally, you may have a need to run some macros before or after the submit action is performed. You can enter the macro names in the columns pre-macro and post-macro. So, if there is a macro mentioned in the pre-macro column for submit, then the macro will run before the submit has been performed. Similarly, the post macro will run after the action has been performed. These are the additional steps that need to be performed in case of Form EUCs. Besides these 3 cuboids, the Form Staging cuboid will also be created. These cuboids are not visible to the end users, but only to designers and developers. Now we are ready to export the EUC, so let's do just that. As before, we click on Export EUC to start the process. The login window may pop up, enter your credentials, and click on OK to continue. Click on Continue on the confirmation window. Click on OK on the next confirmation window. The exporting of the EUC has begun. Select the neighborhood under which the application is to be created. In our case, it is the training neighborhood. The process of creating the application on the server has begun. The onboarding time depends on the number of sheets and workbooks to be created. As the process is very compute-intensive, it is advisable that during onboarding or the application care should be taken to not interact with the accelerator workbook. Let's wait till the status bar shows 100% and goes away. We are also waiting for the successful export of EUC, which is indicated by a pop-up window. At this time, click on OK to continue. We can now close the accelerator workbook. Using the Solution Manager template, we should assign access to the different roles, i.e., the representative and the head office. Assigning access using the Solution Manager is covered in a separate video. From here, we will go back to the portal to download our onboarded application templates. Now that the access has been assigned, we see the two templates on the portal. The templates were uploaded to the business unit training, and the EUC name is the mortgage calculator. My role has access to both the representative and head office templates. Therefore, they are both visible to me on the portal. Let's start by downloading the head office template from the portal. Once the template has been downloaded our system, let's open the downloaded file. Once the file has opened up, from the Boardwalk menu, let's click on Download Data. Once the data has downloaded, we observe that the head office workbook has only one sheet, Rates. Head office can update the rates using this workbook, which then will be available to the mortgage workbook. Let's close this workbook and download the mortgage calculator workbook from the portal. Open the downloaded file, followed by downloading the data, as we did in the head office file. The Create New Request is the default sheet. Notice it has the 4 required columns and the 2 columns we added. The Instructions tab is also visible. However, we don't see the Rates tab since it is a hidden tab, and we don't see the Mortgage Calculator tab either because during the configuration of the rules for the Mortgage Calculator form, it was set to appear when creating a new request. We are now ready to create a new request. To do so, we click on the Boardwalk menu and look for Create Request in the Form Update section of the ribbon. On clicking of the button, multiple things happen. The Form tab is made visible. A new row is added at the top of the Create New Request cuboid, and the cuboid needs to be submitted. Click on OK to continue. Once the submit is completed, the form staging cuboid is dynamically downloaded using the newly created ID. A Create Request Successful message pops up. Click on OK to continue. Notice the request ID and display active values. The form staging sheet remains hidden since the user does not interact with it. Navigate to the HMC tab. Notice the logged-in user value has been filled. Let us now enter some values in the form. Branch is a drop-down, and we will select a branch. Based on the branch, the rate is populated in the form. Enter the borrower's name, address, phone number, loan amount, term of the loan, first payment due date, value or price of the home, annual homeowner's insurance. Then, let's fill some lender information too. We could fill in the year for which we might be interested in looking at the balance and a date to go with it. Our form has information now, and we can save this to the database, which is done by clicking on Submit Request from the Form Updates menu. The form data submission process starts by requesting comments, then copying the data to the form staging table and submitting to the database. Next, the Create New Request has values updated in the Inform Cuboid ID column, and that too is submitted. We could have updated the borrower's name and lender's name before submitting the request. Since we have entered the values, the next time the worksheet is submitted, the values will also be submitted to the database. Let's create another request. A new row is added at the top and the cuboid is being submitted. You may enter a comment or not. Next, the cuboid will be retrieved again so that one can see the new ID, and the staging table, which we may recall is not visible, is downloaded using the new ID. Wait for the Create Request Successful message to appear. Switch to the form now. You will notice all the values are still showing. This is by design that the form is not cleared of the values. And the formulas are there too. You can overwrite the user-entered values. Let's change the input to reflect another request. Once the changes have been made, the request can now be submitted. The request has been submitted successfully. Notice how the latest request indicates that it is the active one. Just having the request ID is not very helpful in identifying the request, so we should fill in the borrower's and lender's name. Now we are ready to retrieve a different request than the one that is active. Select the request with ID 4360 and click on Retrieve Request. The data retrieval processes will load the staging table with the data and then populate the form with the data. Wait for the process to complete, i.e., the Retrieve Request Successful message. Notice the request that we retrieved is now the active one. Let's navigate to the form sheet to review the data downloaded. It is the same data that we had entered for that request. It is not necessary that the application has only one form. Applications may have multiple forms, and they can be configured the same way. This concludes the session on onboarding form-based applications in Excel to Boardwalktech platform and how to navigate those applications.